you. Well, hi, everyone. Thank you so much for inviting me today. And I really appreciate the opportunity to share with you some of the strategies and ideas and concepts that we use to create our projects. And I should tell you that I usually describe myself as a cultural researcher, which is a name that I totally made up because if I introduced myself as an artist, people would say, what kind of sculptures do you make? Or what kind of paintings do you make? And that's not how I work at all. And the kind of work that I do is very interdisciplinary. And now there's a name for it, social practice or community engaged work. And I don't know if, are you all familiar with those terms? Yeah, I don't really like using either one of those. I'm happy that they exist, and I think there's a lot of really interesting dialogue surrounding them. But I think that, you know, the kind of work that I do, because it is so rooted in community and trying to understand the needs of people in a place, is that I'm just not so wedded to any art world terminology, because most of the people that I work with are not artists. And it's kind of intimidating for them. So I really try and choose the language that fits with what they're interested in. And I wanted to start with this picture from my studio, because this is also how I like to work. I do a lot of research and I spend a lot of time reading books. This is actually from an amazing book about restorative justice, written by Fania E. Davis. And so that's been really helpful for my thinking. So I just wanted to show you, like, what does it look like when I do my work? This is one of the ways that I try to understand some of the broader concepts, and something that's really key that's in the restorative justice book and also really important in my work are relationships. How do I relate to the people that I'm working with? How do they relate to each other? And, you know, I think the reason why I stay away from social practice or community engaged projects is because the work that I do takes a really long time. And it's unusual for me to do a project that's less than a year. And the project that I'm going to talk to you about today is in its 7th year, which is the longest project that I've done. And I didn't intend for it to be 7 years, but usually the work I do takes between 3 and 5 years. And I will say also, it's never finished. It's never done because I'm sort of moving into the stream of the life cycle of a particular place, and then I move out of it. But there's no clear finishing point. A lot of that depends on, unfortunately, funding. And that's something that we can talk about a little bit later after I show you some images. But I do want to share sort of the behind the scenes after I show you the work. So if as I'm talking, there are questions that you have, like, how'd you do that?
Sorry to interrupt, but we're not seeing any slides.
Oh, not seeing any slides. Okay, thanks, Jean. Anyway, what I just want to make clear through this is that I come to the work as a creative person and not an academic. Even though I do look at a lot of research about history or research about urban planning and how we understand our relationship to place. So today I want to talk to you about Commons Archive. Commons Archive is a grassroots history project that's rooted in North Oakland and really is about neighbor to neighbor relationships. How do we understand the people who are right nearby us? North Oakland, especially the area that I've been working in, has been undergoing rapid gentrification since, I would say, 2007 or 2010. And I want to talk also today about some of the choices of visual presentation for the project, because it's all intentional. Every kind of format, every kind of way that I present the information is really about moving some aspect or message of the project forward and making it really accessible. And, you know, another hat that I've been wearing for parallel to my professional career as an artist, so the past 30 years, is that I'm an adult literacy educator, and I've run an adult literacy program at a library. I've also been teaching adults English as another language. And so that's been much more informative to me than the art world, because I really want to be able to speak to many, many different people. So the logo for Commons Archive is actually handwriting from neighbors in the community. And we use this logo in a lot of different kinds of materials. I really wanted to share this quote with you from a longtime neighbor in the Golden Gate, because, you know, when we talk about history, oftentimes people think of history, capital H, it's in a book and somebody else is telling what those narratives are. But what we're most interested in Commons Archive are the stories from people who've been living in the neighborhood. And it's actually really difficult to provide it, you know, the platform for people to share stories. And what's happening in the Golden Gate and Santa Fe and Longfellow, these neighborhoods that are part of North Oakland, is that African Americans are rapidly being displaced for a lot of different reasons. And all of those stories and connections and networks are being lost. And so there's a high turnover in the people who are coming into the neighborhood. They're much whiter, they're more affluent, and they're less likely to come together to build these neighbor to neighbor relationships. And so of course that raises a lot of tension. Something else that's really key for Commons Archive, but it runs across all of the projects that we do as Marksearch, is bringing together a network of organizations that are based in place. And, you know, a lot of these groups, whether it's a city affiliated neighborhood group or business improvement district or a block club or a nonprofit neighborhood group, a lot of them rely on volunteers, and people do a lot of other things in their lives. So they're not necessarily tied into coming together as a kind of consortium. You know, and when I think about what stability means and sustainability, yes, I think about the physical environment, but more importantly, I think about the kind of relational and cultural environment of a place. And so it's really important, you know, I like to leverage my privilege as coming in as a creative person with funding to see how can I bring some of these groups together in a new way? How can I provide opportunities for people who are doing similar work to learn about what they're each doing? So what I want to do now is show the first video. And this video is of an event that I co-organized with the Golden Gate Branch Library in 2018 for their centennial celebration.
everyone to the Golden Gate Library's Centennial Celebration. We've got a lot lined up for you today. We've got music, we've got community organizations, all based pretty much locally. And also Sue Martin's been documenting our neighborhood, the Golden Gate neighborhood. She listens with an open heart, an open mind, and she lets you tell your story about your life in the Golden Gate neighborhood.
I'll be sitting when the evening comes, watching the ships roll in, then watch them roll away again. I'm sitting on...
Commons Archive was involved very much in today's event. That's how we've been able to have all of these donations and all of the tables, all of the groups that came in to table today.
I left my home in Georgia, headed for the...
A lot of them we know just because of Commons Archive.
What I have on is a medium. No, it's not. And they do not, if you follow the instructions, watch the whole walk.
I'm done.
You finished? Okay, I'm almost finished as well.
It's a business.
Ooh, I like that.
Information. Okay, which one do you want?
You see mine?
I was happy to help Sue work on her Commons Archive project, and I helped design the image for the celebration featuring the building, and then I made the front door extra big in proportion to the building. I wanted to emphasize the people coming and going.
It's a very diverse neighborhood. Since the 40s, it's been predominantly African American, working class neighborhood. Of course, Oakland, the real estate market is exploding. There's been a lot of newcomers to the neighborhood and a lot of people moving to places that are more affordable. And so that's also an interesting aspect of the Commons Archive project, because it seeks to find the stories of people who have been here for a long time, as well as newcomers. Right now we have at our front desk some story cards where people are invited to write down memories of the neighborhood. It's interesting to see people when they come in and their wheels start to turn, and you can tell they're starting to think, oh, what story should I tell?
Common Archives and Sue Mark coming here. You know, at first I have to say, we were a little suspect, but she's hung in there, and she's won the respect of a lot of people, and people feel comfortable talking to her. It was a wonderful day. We had new neighbors, we had old neighbors, and we need to know their stories. And so it's very important that we all come together.
Now, therefore, be it resolved that Oakland City Council Member Dan Kolb and the entire City of Oakland at City Hall does hereby enthusiastically honor the Golden Gate Branch Library for its first centennial of service to the community and to the people of Oakland.
Internet may crumble, Google could take a tumble, it might turn out that way. But libraries are here, libraries are here, libraries are here, they're here to stay.
One of the reasons that I wanted to show you that video on, well, one, of course, to show just the multiple organizations and groups that have come together through Commons Archive. But Kathy Leonard's comment was really so key in this process, you know, of building trust. And it takes a long time to build trust with neighbors. And for me, being a white woman coming into and wanting to connect with the longtime African-American neighbors and families, I had to connect with the gatekeepers first. And people needed to see me repeatedly at lots of events, at community meetings. And if I said I was going to do something, I had to do it. And I had to make sure to involve people in the process. And that's part of the reason why the project has been going on for 7 years, because this is not fast work. And I think it's quite dangerous to try and press and do things too quickly. So we've really been fortunate to work in a very emergent and responsive way. And we've had 7 or 8 different grants on the project. And so I do a lot of grant writing in bringing the work together. And the other piece of this process that's really important is something that I just learned the name of, called participatory action research. Is that something that any of you have heard of? Yeah. So I had never heard of it. And last year there was an amazing video series that the Othering and Belonging Institute put on called Radical Research. And you can find those videos online, and there are links to them on the Commons Archive website also. But you know, participatory action research also takes a really long time, and it's very respectful of these multiple layered life cycles in a community. And it's so important to really try and understand what is it that people need and want. The other kind of phenomenon that I think is also really important, I'm not able to move to the next image, is that even though, for example, like in this area, there are a lot of neighborhood groups, there are a lot of block clubs, there are a lot of community organizations. There are also a lot of people who don't belong to any of those groups. So how do we reach people who don't belong to those groups? That was one of the reasons why we decided to root the project at the Golden Gate Branch Library. And you know, the work that we're doing stands on the shoulders of some very important African-American movements. One is the Black Panther Party, which was, you know, their origins and roots are in North Oakland. And we saw Saturo Ned in the video. He's one of the project advisors and a strong mentor for me. You know, and he is talking about how members of the party would meet at the Golden Gate Branch Library. But you don't see, you know, there are no plaques in the library about that. And another organization is called the East Bay Negro Historical Society. And that started in the 1940s with a group of people from their church, African Americans who wanted to make sure that their children knew their history. And they started gathering stories and artifacts just from the people that they knew, and had a series of storefront museums on Grove Street, which is now Martin Luther King Jr. Way, and for a period of time was at the Golden Gate Branch Library. Well, these are all invisible aspects of history. And so part of what we want to do with Commons Archive is connect the dots and make some of these important markers of history more visible for people. And so because of my relationship with Erin Sanders, the manager, which also happened over, you know, several years, she's been very accommodating to allow Commons Archive to occupy the whole library. So people don't know that they're walking into an art project, but for me, and looking at, well, how do I want to present this project? It's everywhere. So there is a, you know, an unused flagpole on the front lawn, and I was like, oh, can we use that? And they said yes. You know, but we had to go through quite a long process to get approval from the library director, but I had a really good ally in Erin, and it was like a win-win because she could see that I would help provide programming. Prior to Erin coming on board, the library had a revolving door of temporary managers, which really kind of dissolved the focus of the library as serving the whole community. They were able to maintain children's programming, but very little adult programming. So adults stopped coming. But when Erin joined, she was really excited to do some new workshops at the library. And here you see in the top Saturo Ned giving a presentation about the origins of the Black Panther Party and the strategies that they used to bring community together. And then the banners in the room there are the ones that you saw people filling out at the centennial celebration. And we wanted people to be able to feel free to write something. So, we used like sentence starters, which is a strategy I use all the time as an adult literacy educator. And the library said, our community room is kind of blah, can you make a mural? And so I proposed to do this instead. And I wasn't sure how people would respond, but, we've got like 150 of these banners. And I think seeing people's handwriting is so important for expressing their desires and views. And then we have photographs in the library, really working with the architecture of the library, representing people in the neighborhood and aspects of the history. So on that internal window pane is an archival image from the Lasardines, who are one of the key founding families of the East Bay Negro Historical Society. And then we have murals in the elevator, and there you see Sharon Vaughn, who's a jazz vocalist. The neighborhood has a long history of music and jazz. Miss Josephine Lee, who was in the video holding up one of these bags. I think she's 95 now, and single-handedly she's been running a free summer jazz program, which of course unfortunately has been on hiatus because of COVID, but we brought in musicians from the summer jazz program for the centennial celebration. So we really wanted to bring everybody into this amazing kind of block party experience, which I could never have done on my own. And I don't think the library could have done it on their own either. So it was a really wonderful way of bringing together resources. But I wanted to dive in a little bit deeper into the process of how I've been working with Commons Archive through one story, Fred Williams. And he is such an important person in the neighborhood. His uncle started Williams Appliances, used appliance store in the 1960s. And when Fred came to Oakland from Alabama in the 1980s, he started working with his uncle and eventually took over the business. And I'll tell you a little bit more about our relationship, but I couldn't meet Fred until a white gatekeeper introduced me to Fred. And this is Laura Ingram. Laura Ingram has been in the neighborhood for, oh my goodness, I think she came to the neighborhood in the late 1970s from San Francisco. She moved to the Bay Area from the South. And so she really understood the formation of block clubs in this part of North Oakland, which is a legacy from the South and also from travel clubs, which were so important during the Great Migration to help people feel safe when they came into a new neighborhood. And, this area was heavily redlined and it was very difficult for African Americans to buy homes. So Laura Ingram started one of the neighborhood groups in the 1980s, and she was a strong activist and really wanted to help bring all neighbors together. So I met Laura at a few different community meetings, but it wasn't until she had seen me at more than 6 or 7 meetings before she agreed to sit down and meet with me. And even then, she said, yeah, I know people, but she didn't give me their information right then. So it took a long time. But after we had our meeting in the neighborhood, she did introduce me to Fred. Laura Ingram also owns a lot of properties in the neighborhood and has rental units. So she's worked with Fred and Williams Appliances to have appliances in her units. I'd like to share Fred's own voice right now, and we can watch a short clip of Fred talking about the neighborhood.
This area is becoming a developer's dream, really. It has changed, even the weather here. The wind don't even blow here no more the same since they put these big old buildings up. It's colder across the street over there when it used to be nice and warm over there. It's cold over there now. And we have people coming by taking pictures, and people have come by and gave me ideas of places to do with this place here. I don't want to sell. I want to keep this going because my uncle had enough faith in me. And he loved this business. This was his baby.
So one of the things that we did before Commons Archive was formed, another iteration of the project, involved gathering neighbor stories and recording them. And, Fred did it, and, Fred is a very, very friendly person, but I didn't go deep into his story until I had come to talk with him several times. And he didn't even really tell me the full extent of his story until I shared with him that I had done a project in Alabama and some of the challenges that we had as white people coming into a small town that was predominantly African American, and that we had proposed to talk to everyone in the town, and all of the white people kept saying, don't talk to the Black people. It's too dangerous, and so when I shared some of those experiences with Fred, then he told me more of his story. And in talking to Fred, we recorded over 2 hours of his story, of his life, of how he came to Oakland. And there you saw, what was that, like 90 seconds? We made a video of the 15 interviews that we did, and each story was reduced to 90 seconds, which is just not enough. And so I'm going to pass around, and I'll talk more about this, but I'm going to pass this around. These are transcripts of all of the interviews that we had done. And so we didn't make this book until 3 years later, but there was just so much important information from people's stories about the change in the community that I wanted to make sure that it didn't just stop with me, and that there would be a way for people to access the information. So this idea of history as public knowledge and how do people have access to it was really, really important. So Fred talked about how he came to, it's not moving. How he came to Oakland in the 1980s, basically to escape some persecution that he was suffering in Alabama, and he really had no choice. His father had been died in an accident. He basically said like there was just no more future for me. And so his uncle, who he calls Pops, really took him under his wing, and Fred started working at Williams Appliances, which is a thriving business. And here's a picture of it from the 1980s. And one of the things that Pop told Fred is like, you know, you've got to be there every day. You've got to connect with people. You've got to show them that you're there. And so one of the key advertising strategies was by placing all of the appliances out on the sidewalk. Well, now, because you saw in the video, there are these condos and apartments, people don't like to see that. And they called Fred out as, you know, blighting the neighborhood. And so now if Fred puts any appliances out on the sidewalk, he's fined, you know. But in fact, Fred has been making the neighborhood more connected and more safe for decades. His family has. And so there's like this huge gap in understanding, because people are not, you know, the new people are not taking time to learn where do they live and who is in their neighborhood, you know. And Fred says hello to everyone, but people were not seeing him as an important part of their neighborhood, how they wanted to be in the neighborhood, even though that's where they were moving into. And the other thing, you know, Pop said, like, you just have to show that you're there and serve people. And so they always delivered the appliances. And, you know, when people saw Pop's truck out there, they knew that Pop was there, and that they were open for business, and lots of people came there to hang out. And it was really a community hub, a really important community hub. So I've stayed in touch with Fred over the years, and I asked him for permission, along with everybody else who we interviewed, you know, could we publish your stories in this book? And Fred said, you know, yes, of course. And the day that I came to show him the book and I gave him a copy of the book, he just started to cry. And he said, you know, I'm an uneducated man. I'm not book smart. And I never thought in my entire life that my words would be in a book. And, you know, it was a really important and moving experience for him to know that his children and his grandchildren would know his story, you know, his family, but also, you know, everybody in the neighborhood, because these books now live in the Golden Gate Library. Something else that we worked on with Fred, because, you know, now that I just had a text message from Fred actually before we started. He tried to call me, but, you know, Fred and I have a relationship together. He's not just somebody I interviewed, you know. And I invited Fred and his wife Ruth Ann to tell their story, to have a listening session. You know, part of the challenge is like, when do we have the opportunity to hear stories, and when do people have the opportunity to share stories? So right before everything shut down in 2020, this is in February, we had 2 listening circles. And this one, we invited Fred to come to a community-based organization right around the corner from Williams Appliances. You know, and his business has been there for decades. And this organization called Place for Sustainable Living, which is a very interesting kind of demonstration eco-village. It's been around for about 10 years. They're also a very important activator in the community, but they have a lot of people coming and going into this center, and they don't necessarily know the stories of the neighborhood. And Fred had never been inside of the gates of this compound. So it was kind of like a revolutionary experience, and it seemed like such a natural connection. Well, when Fred was there, everybody in the circle in that room, everybody knew who Fred was because he has said hello to them. He didn't know them personally, but that's part of his Southern upbringing. And when he first started dating Ruth Ann, who grew up in Oakland, she's like, hey, you know what? You better not do that anymore. That's dangerous. You're going to get in trouble. And he just said, that's just who I am. And so he has never stopped doing that. And he's created this kind of beautiful sense of well-being on the corner where his store was. And the day of this event, he had just found out that someone in his family had passed away. He was very sad. And I said, are you sure you want to do this? And he said, yes, it's so important. And so for about 2 hours, he talked about his experiences in the neighborhood, why he came. And we, of course, had hoped to do more of these. We did 2 in February, and then we couldn't do more because of COVID, but we're now working on the next phase of the project, and how can we have very small, intimate gatherings on a block level where people can come together and really listen and share stories with each other. So this series of books, I brought a couple of them and I can pass them around. There are 9 books in this series on the Golden Gate Library local collection, and this idea of an archive. When I first was talking to Erin, she's like, well, we can't have bits of paper and other materials in the library. We just don't have anybody to staff it. And so she said, well, why don't you make books instead? I was like, oh, of course, that's what a library does. They have books. And so we intentionally made books that are not digitized so that people need to come to the library and see them. It's a new section of the library. It's an official part of the library's collection. And we, see this as something that every branch library in the Oakland public library system could do, is have a very local, neighbor-related collection of materials. People see me as the historian for the community, but I see myself more as a conduit. So people were giving me all kinds of materials, and I wanted them to go back into the hands of the people in the community. So we have one title that you were seeing, the Golden Gate Conversations, and the transcripts, and then other materials. Like one is actually a set of plans and information from an urban planning group. There's several urban planning groups that have looked at the Golden Gate Library for, I think, since the 1980s and produced really interesting reports, and people in the neighborhood have them in their basements, but nobody else can see them. So now they're back in the library. And we had another kind of community celebration, block club, block party style at the library to launch the books. And you see in the upper corner, Susan Anderson, she wrote a paper about the project and presented it to give a larger framing and context. She's a historian and a writer and specializes in African-American history in California. But we also brought in musicians and food. We had a neighbor panel. You see in the lower corner, we had 2 neighbors, one longtime neighbor who was born in the neighborhood. She's in her 70s, African-American woman, and a newer neighbor, white, both talking about their experiences. And then everybody in the audience is a neighbor too. So they are talking about their experiences. And over the years, we've had different kinds of workshops, celebrations to bring music and story to the library, to bring Black Panther history, bringing neighborhood groups together. We've also hosted and organized a series of walking discussions and brought in neighbors to lead the discussions rather than talking head historians, because they're the ones who know the neighborhood best. And it's another way, another platform for neighbors to be able to talk and share with each other. And then we've been trying to gather the stories directly from neighbors at different events through community organizations. And at this point, we have around 200 stories that we've gathered in people's handwriting. And it's really just about whatever people want to say, whatever kind of stories. It's almost like the more sort of daily life related it is, the more interesting it becomes as an artifact when you think like 50 years from now, or even 10 years from now. This will be something very interesting for people to know about, reflective of individuals' feelings. So we're planning to publish them in another book for the reference collection at the library. And again, I think this relates back to my background as a creative to, spend time on the formatting of these cards, and thinking also about how important it is to see people's handwritings. It's very visceral. It's, you're not hearing their voice, but you're kind of seeing their voice through the handwriting. And this is an image from the last event that we had for Commons Archive in the spring, which was on Zoom, which, I was so grateful that we have Zoom, because I was in Japan and talking with people who are really integral for the next phase of the project. Satoru Ned, who's a mentor and advisor, Leo Mercer, who's a rap activist, Shakira Porter, who is one of the founders of Neighbors for Racial Justice, Toby Lewis, who is a member of a Longfellow Block Club and also the Longfellow Community Association, Heidi Herrera, who's a new North Oakland neighbor and has been helping with graphic design, social media, and restorative justice for the project, and Miyuki Baker, who is getting their PhD in community activism and how people come together. And we're really talking about, what are the challenges in creating a process that allows people to come together and tell their stories. And that's kind of where we are right now with mapping out the next phase of the project, which I'm happy to tell you more about, but I can see that we're at noon right now, and I thought it would be good to pause, and I'd love to hear any questions that you have and share more of the print material that I brought in.
Yeah, great. Anyone have any questions to follow up with what we've seen so far?
Hi, I was curious about, well, so first we talked about the listening circles, and I was wondering, was it only Fred telling the story, or was it a circle where everyone knew when to tell a story? Was there back and forth?
That's a really good question. And originally when we planned the event, we were gonna have everybody share their stories, but it was so important what Fred and Ruth Ann were saying that we prioritized their stories, and everybody in the circle listened. And that was also a really incredible experience, and people responded to what they heard and asked questions, but did not go into their own stories. And that I was hoping to do a follow-up.
Yeah, go ahead. I'm gonna just repeat it into the.
I'm also wondering how you think that affects the collective memory of the whole neighborhood, or all the sharing going on. What do you? I don't know. I just am curious about your general thoughts on how all these group discussions, how to draft affects the sense of itself.
Oh, that's a really good question. And I think, what I've been really interested in is how do we understand ourselves as a neighbor, and we are all neighbors. That's something we all, every one of us is a neighbor to somebody else, but how do we understand that role in that relationship? And so I think, first and foremost, I wanted to provide many different kinds of platforms for people to share stories. Some are documented, some are not documented, some are like parties, and some are smaller events. Some are workshops where you can learn history. Some are, are the walking discussions where you can talk to other neighbors. And so it's a variety of opportunities because it's not one size fits all. And my hope is that people who are new to the neighborhood would feel like, oh, here's another chance for me to learn something about where I'm living. And that's a big reason why we wanted to root the project initially at the library, because that's like a central hub of information. And how great is it to have books that are right there about your neighborhood? Go ahead, Hannah.
Thank you for the presentation. I have two questions. One is, what was the initiation of the project? Who asked you to do this work? And the other question is, you said about, or that's what I understood, it was about establishing sustainable neighborhoods relating to their social networks. But how far is the urban planning or urban development influenced by your stories, by the stories you collect? Did any urban planner from the city contact you, or did they ask about the stories? Do they know about the stories? Also,
Say that last part again.
Also about politicians, did they ask about this? Do they know about the project? Because in the end, I think a lot of political and planning decisions.
Yeah, really good questions. And I think what you're asking is, what's the larger frame in terms of connectivity for the project? So in answer to the last part of your question, yes, when in the video that you saw about the centennial celebration, Dan Kalb, who is the council member for District 1, where that neighborhood is, knows about the project. And as far as leveraging the project, not so much, but he was perfectly happy to come and honor the neighborhood. And I think it was really important for him to be there because there were like 400 people who came through that day, and it would have been a huge void if somebody from the city governance was not there. But let me back up to your first question, because I think that is also a really important question of like, well, how do you start doing this kind of work? And I was invited to participate in a pilot project at the Collard Institute, which is a printmaking studio based in Berkeley. And they really wanted to do work to branch out into the community. So I'm not a printmaker, but they invited me as a community activator to work on a project on the San Pablo corridor, sort of along a 3-mile stretch. And I was like, well, that's too huge. I walked around, it's like, I want to do something right here around the library. And so that's really how the project got started. I was not invited by the community. But being a neighbor, I live just 10 minutes away from that library. I understood some of the dynamics of what was going on. Sorry, I just need to get a little water. But I think that's also why the project, as it's been growing through time, I've gotten into deeper and deeper relationship with people in the community, and I've been able to be more responsive to their needs and what people want, and have continued my partnership with the Collard Institute as an institutional partner, because many of the grants that I've applied for, I can't apply for as an individual. And the library also doesn't have the capacity to be a direct partner. So we've continued our relationship for these years, and they've provided a huge amount of programming support, financial support, strategic support. And it's been really beneficial for them too, because now they have a relationship with that part of the community. And a lot of people had no idea what the Collard Institute is. And then your other question about urban planning and urban planners. I personally don't have a relationship with urban planners, but I do know that one of the neighborhood groups that was started, remember I showed you the image of Laura Ingram, she started the Golden Gate Community Group, which is now being run by Kathy Leonard, and you saw her in the video, and another neighbor, Angela Janino. They actually do have a direct relationship with a city planner and have done a lot of work on one particular street in the neighborhood, which is a mixed use residential and industry route. And there have been a lot of neighborhood conflicts because there are more people living there, and one meat packer that's there, and it's created a lot of tension. And so they have been working with an urban planner in the city to redesign the street and also make sure that the meat packing company is holding up its end of the deal of, when they can have trucks there and not to have, big trucks idling at 2 a.m, things like that. But I have my closest ties with the library in terms of working with the city government, because the library is a part of the Oakland City.
I just wanted to say that I really like the Commons Archive logo. I think it's cool that you chose like not just one handwritten logo, but a variety. And I was looking on the website here too. I think it's cool that it alternates between writing and handwriting. Handwriting is interesting how distinctive it is to the person, how we can recognize it immediately when it's a friend or a relative or whatever. And I was wondering, it's kind of about the process of creating the logo, or how you decided on what kind of handwriting, what the school, kind of just going for as much variety.
Going for as much variety as possible. I didn't know exactly what we were going to do with the logo, but I did feel like, if we had the opportunity to make a flag, that I wanted it to feel really welcoming and representative of the community. And I'm passing around a brochure that we had in the library when we first started having some large photos on the interior window panes. And it gives kind of a quick snapshot of the history and talks about the East Bay Negro Historical Society. And it's, it's very small, like the size of a business card. And that was really intentional too, because I wanted people to feel like, oh, it's no big deal to take it. Larger brochures like, oh, I'm not sure I want that commitment. I don't want to read that much. So really trying to make it very digestible for people, and including photos and text so that it would be something that somebody would want to, keep and look at.
So we have a couple of questions in the chat. First from David Peters, who I'm so excited is here with us today. Is the Commons Archive an official project of the OPL, Oakland Public Library? And are the archives a part of the OPL collections?
Oh, that's a really interesting question because, you know, it's not officially part of the library, but everybody in the library knows about it, and they've been an amazing partner, and I'm happy for them to use materials and information. And like October is Family History Month, and so they asked, you know, oh, can we use Commons Archive videos? Can we use some of your story gathering strategies? And I said, of course, yes. So I feel like it's a really mutually beneficial relationship of resourcing, but and I've worked together with the manager at the Golden Gate Branch Library, but I'm not sure that the library would say it's an official project of the library. And then as far as, you know, the materials being part of the larger library archives, originally my plan was to make this local collection so specialized that it would only be at the Golden Gate Branch Library. However, the Oakland History Room, who I've worked with them, and also the African American Museum and Library at Oakland, which is part of the Oakland Public Library system, both said, could we have a set of those books too? And I said yes, because a lot of people go to those resources to do research. So it's kind of an and. I wanted to make sure that these books were easily available for people in the neighborhood and for anybody else who wants to do research about that part of the city.
Thank you. Another question from Olivia. Olivia says, thank you so much for the presentation. It seems like such a gift from residents to us for them to share their stories. And it's powerful to hear that Fred was moved to see his story in the Golden Gate Conversations book, that the gift wasn't one directional, but that he received a gift in return. Could you speak more about how you think about the ethics of interviewing? Where do you see the risks in interviewing, and in particular, the risk of it being extractive? What are ways to ensure that the interview experience is rewarding for the people who are telling their stories?
Oh, that's a really interesting question. And I've thought a lot about those, and I can't say that I have answers per se, because you know, just like with everything with the project, it took me a lot longer to be able to do these interviews. And I think something that was really helpful for me was, one, you know, the relational process of like one neighbor saying, hey, you can talk to my neighbor, you know, and especially I think for me being a white person, to have another white person introduce me to their Black neighbor made them feel more comfortable in talking to me. So having kind of local ambassadors who are sort of paving the way. So like I said, I live in North Oakland, but I don't live in this neighborhood. So it doesn't matter, I'm an outsider. I could be from San Francisco, I could be from Berkeley, I could be 10 minutes away. I don't belong. So really it's about building the relationships. And I think that, you know, like Laura Ingram, it took her a long time before she shared names with me. It's having an introduction that really helps. The other thing, you know, as far as the interviews not being extractive, is giving people ample opportunity to understand the process. So I talked to them for a long time before we even had a meeting. I did pre-interviews, which is something that I had not done before, but I did pre-interviews where I asked some questions to see what kinds of stories they might want to share. I let people, of course, ask me any question that they wanted, and that was not recorded except by notes. And I would say I did pre-interviews with probably 3 times as many people as who we recorded interviews with. So not everybody feels comfortable with having their story recorded. And even after they shared some information with me, I think they felt even more vulnerable, like, well, I'll share that with you, but it's not for public consumption. Or you can share information about what I just said, but please make it anonymous. And as far, like, I think that helps with like not making it extractive, because again, it's about building and supporting the relationships. And you know, the reciprocation, you know, of course, I wanted people to have the transcript of their story. So even before we published the book, we gave them the printed transcript of their story, and we had made this video compilation, and we gave everybody who participated a copy of the CD. And so I think that's really important as far as like building the trust, supporting the relationship, not making it exploitive, is making sure that whoever you're working with receives freely what it is that you're producing. And like if they want more than one copy, you know, I willingly gave them, you know, up to a certain point, you know, I gave some people several copies because they're like, oh, I want to share this with my uncle. I want to share this with my children.
Go ahead, Hannah.
I don't have a question, I just wanted to add that it's maybe also part of this transformational action research that we cannot have a plan how everything works out, but we have to be able to adapt it to go say, I tell you my story, but I don't want to publish it, and then that's it, and then you have to like it's like kind of a circle process of research.
Yeah, I mean, it's so important to be respectful of each person's humanity in the process.
The term common. How I know the term common mostly as like an anti-capitalist organizer. And I'm curious how you do, and also that in relationship to funding. And if you could share more about the funding structure that you do, and how the distribution works. If there is an distribution, and also maybe directly the question. This one ties into the question of funding, I guess, around the sustainability of funding, like project-based funding, and tying that back again to this question of anti-capitalism, like what kind of dependencies do you create by having a funding dependency?
Oh gosh. Yeah, it's I think the biggest challenge, just to maybe start from the tail end of your question, you know, and it's kind of like I just want to say, you know, I've been passing around some things that you're welcome to look at and return to me, but I also want to pass around these calling cards, which you can choose any one that you want and keep.
Simon, I'm sorry, could you repeat that one more time? I didn't catch it.
Briefly,
Yeah.
relationship to anti-capitalism, whether the funding structures that Marx has access to also relates to these sort of anti-capitalist questions. So instead of reproducing the model in which people have an DIY level access to funding from the project-based temporarily, whether you can use that funding to actually change the system of unequal distribution.
Thank you.
So first I want to say that there's an incredibly awkward fit in doing this kind of work. You know, community life cycles do not match funding life cycles. You know, oftentimes I'm asked to do something in 1 year and it's going to take me 2 years. I've had good relationships with the funders and have explained to them when I need to extend the time frame, and they always understand. So I may not get more money, but I can get more time. And I think it is really challenging to do this kind of work and operate, you know, funder to funder. It's complicated to present the project to an arts foundation versus you know, a humanities foundation versus, you know, city funding. But that's, you know, I have done that. So it is, I mean, as far as like personal sustainability, I've been writing grants and learning how to create a story for a project that hasn't, you know, doesn't exist yet. I mean, that's how I do my work. And then, you know, in terms of like anti-capitalist, I never sell anything that I make. Nothing is for sale, except to support, like, this we printed for the library centennial celebration. And it is for sale in the library to provide money for the Friends group, but not for me. And you know, about the word commons, which is so commonly used now, you know, I really thought a lot about Ivan Illich and his sense of like how do we share resources together, and was thinking really about breaking down this kind of hierarchy of history, whereas history is not taught down and it's not like major event, it's really everyone's history together. And how can the library really be this resource and place for people to share history? And we do work with a lot of people in the community and provide honorariums for people who do work with us. Everybody who's done a workshop has received an honorarium, and we've paid that. The library helps to promote, you know, they promote it, they give us the space. They don't have the funding to pay people, but we do. So that's how we're working together. And the next phase of the project, we're working on a micro granting program to provide resources to neighbors on a few blocks so that they can develop what they believe is the best way for them to connect among themselves with neighbors. So that's what we're working on right now.
Yes, go ahead. Could you introduce yourself, please?
My name is Molly.
Hi, Molly.
I have this curious what things came out of the meeting that got that drawing of it.
Well, one is it takes a long time, you know. The other, I think the big issue that came up, you know, in that conversation is like, how are we managing isolation because of COVID? But how is it also magnifying how we were already isolated before COVID? Another big issue that came up is how are we relating to our unhoused neighbors? And what are ways that we can try and support each other? And what does it mean to be, you know, Leo talked a lot about like, what does it mean for me to be a displaced North Oakland neighbor coming back to my neighborhood and then having the white neighbors be afraid of me, but this is where I'm from, you know. So there are all of these kinds of conflicts, and you could say microaggressions just on like, how do we walk down the street? And Satoru Ned, who's just like a phenomenally inspirational person, you know, talks a lot about how, you know, change is a revolution that happens step by step, person to person. And, you know, he's talking about how important it is to reach just one or two people. And from there, it expands exponentially. And I think, you know, pre-COVID, even for me doing this kind of work, is like, you got to have a lot of people come to an event. You've got to have wide reach so that, you know, it shows that you're doing the work that you promised to do for a funder. But now I think it's much more important, and maybe has always been, that depth over breadth is what's going to give the longevity for a relationship and deeper meaning for the relationship.
I have a closing question then. So throughout the presentation, I was just trying to track all of the different methods that you used in your, broad umbrella project, and I wanted to know if I had missed any. So for collecting stories or getting information in, I saw you have the little kiosks with cards, do oral interviews, listening sessions, and community celebrations, and then to push information kind of back out. I wrote down that you have the walking tours from neighbors and the books, both with the transcripts and kind of the printed cards, and then the 90-second videos. So are there any other
and workshops?
And workshops, yeah. And I guess, how do you decide when you employ each one of those? Or is it kind of, how do you pepper them in to create this bigger composition?
Well, they've definitely come through cyclically, and learning from each one. And the walking discussion started very early on. And actually having neighbor leaders was something that happened organically, because we did have a walking discussion that was led by Jean Anderson. And during that time, there were several neighbors who started, so we had found some people in the community to talk, but then there were more neighbors that started sharing directly. And so I began to see how important it was not to just make sure that there was a big information dump, but that there would be opportunity for reciprocal sharing. And I think that's really what's been critical about how we're building out, let's say, a celebration. How can people share their story during the celebration? During the workshops, how can people share their stories during the workshops as well? So we wanted to have some very active engagement, and then also, like these story cards with the little kiosks are a bit more passive, because they've been at several different libraries, at cafes, at community-based organizations around senior centers, so that people could participate when they wanted to.
Great. So we're out of time, but thank you so much, Sue, for joining us. And we can maybe share some contact information afterwards if y'all have more questions or follow-up. So.
Thank you all.